Hey everybody, thank you guys all for the great questions. We got another few questions about renovation. A lot of people are looking at, renovating something, buying something, renovating it, etc. How is it worth more? Is it not worth more? So renovations are super important because you can overspend or underspend, and each one means something. In other words, a carpet or a hardwood floor in Texas can be dramatically different price than something in Arizona. So there's a lot that can happen, on square footage and location and even rents. And so that's what we're trying to determine here is, what are the three most important things that I look at before we decide to do a renovation. So I'm going to walk you through a couple of our secrets, things that we've learned over time, and just through basic mistakes that we've made over the years. So the first one that I like to talk about is, what does the market want? And I think what happens here a lot of times is people force this. In other words, I've seen this a lot. So we bought a property in San Antonio, Texas in I think it was around 2008, 2009. So and at the time, the market did not support higher rents. In other words, there was no new construction, nobody was renovating anything, the economy wasn't great. As you guys know what was going on in 2008 and 2009, it was not a time that you wanted to raise rents. And so it would have been crazy for us, it sounds so obvious now, to think that we could renovate something and then get more rent for it, in an economy that's so depressed. At the time, people were losing their jobs and they were partnering up and they were moving around and they were living with their parents, and there was all kinds of chaos going on during this time. It was a terrible time for a lot of people. And so, the last thing that you want to do is spend a bunch of money on something and renovate it and try to get $100 to $200 more in rent. And so here's the cool part, though. We bought the property and we still own it today. And what happened was, as you guys all know, the market started to crack, things started to get a little bit better. We started to see more units being built, and no matter where you are in the country or in the world, this could be going on for you. You're starting to see stuff pop up and newer things. And that's a result of the economy doing better. And so what happens when the economy does better, people have more money, then they start to move into newer things, and then all of a sudden, it makes properties like the one that we own in San Antonio now available to look at for what we would call a value add. This is a property that we already owned. And so what we did internally, we said, okay, what is a 1-bedroom, a 2-bedroom, a 3-bedroom need, number one, and two, how much can we get for it? So those are the two things that you always start with. But you always have to start with, what does the market want? In other words, you can do whatever you want. And you guys have seen this before. You've seen people build stuff, nobody ever moves in because it's high priced or whatever. It's like, who's going to afford that? You know what I mean? And then oftentimes those things don't do so well. And that basically means that those people built something or did something that the market didn't even want. So I've seen this a lot with assisted living facilities, where these guys are buying these houses and they're trying to convert them, and they're trying to get $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month, and it's a very complicated business model. But more importantly is, they're following this $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month, but they're not paying attention to what's happening in that market. I've seen people open these up in markets that there's just not that kind of disposable income in that market. And I've also seen them in areas that have been super successful, where people are more affluent and have money to spend that. But $4,000, $5,000, $6,000 a month is a lot of money. And so that's what I'm saying about, what does the market want? So you have to wait to see, and you have to monitor it, and you don't want to be a pioneer here. You want to let other people build new stuff and renovate stuff and let the rents rise, and then you can figure that out. So that's what we ended up doing, is we ended up deploying capital and starting to test it. So the first thing that we did is we did 1 unit, and then we did 4, then we did 8. and we're testing it. We're saying, okay, how much money do we want to spend in here? What's the rent resistance? And what we were seeing is that a lot of the people that were in the property that we owned wanted to move into an upgraded unit, and they were willing to pay $100, $150, even $200 more per unit. And so you start to test that in your own community, and you start to test that in your market rather than have an all-in approach. Now, there's nothing wrong with an all-in approach. If everyone's doing it and there's a good solid market and you got lots of comps out there, then by all means do this. But in a market that's just starting to evolve, be very, very careful, because you can really spend a bunch of money here. The biggest thing that I found that most people do is they don't pay attention to this second part, is what are the numbers as far as a renovation versus the rent. So let me give you an example. So in some markets, we're seeing different levels of renovations, as you guys know. I actually went to Austin, and I asked the guy that was developing a project or renovating a project like this, and he was spending upwards of $15,000 in one unit inside of it. So he's putting in granite countertops, tile backsplashes, tile floor, wood floors, real wood floors, you know, all the most beautiful stainless appliances. And I got to tell you, these units were absolutely gorgeous and beautiful. He basically spent a ton of money in there. But let me tell you what we're spending. We're spending closer to $8,000 to $9,000 for the exact same thing. Now, we didn't have tile floors, we didn't have granite countertops, and we didn't have stainless appliances, but we found other areas that we could shrink down on the expense side that didn't affect the rent. And so in that same market, we're spending $6,000, $7,000 less per unit and getting very similar rents, okay? Now, his were a little bit higher, but not for $7,000 higher. And so that's the point. You can really overspend. I've seen in the beginning, we were just doing wood floors on the first floor units. And by the way, if you're going to hold any property for a long period of time, carpet is a very, very expensive expense, because you know, maybe you got 2, 3, 4 years of life in a carpet. You know, that could be one renter, it could be multiple renters, whatever. So we started doing wood floors, which are more expensive, because a wood floor could be anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000, let's say, inside of one unit, depending on the square footage. But all of a sudden, that wood floor is going to command a higher rent than a property without it. Believe it or not, there's a dollar number of about $50 a month for a wood floor. So then from there, you just add on. So a washer and dryer, for example, might be another $75. You know, brand new sinks might be another 10 or 15. And so you get the point. So as you start to piece this together and you start to realize what does the market want, and you start to see different kinds of upgrades, then you always got to monitor, you know, what do we want to spend? Because there's too little and there's too much. And so you want to monitor that. And for us, it's been right around $6,000 to $8,000. That's for a full renovation in a unit. But there are people that are spending 15 to 20, and there are people that are spending 2 or 3. So our belief is that we're maximizing the amount of rent we can get by spending somewhere between $6,000 and $8,000. Now this all depends on the unit itself. But I can tell you a couple tricks that we've learned over the years. One, residents don't care if you have stainless appliances or black appliances, but there's a significant difference in the cost. That's just one example. Residents don't care if you have a kitchen fixture that costs $50 or $250. They don't care. So those are the kinds of things that you have to look at as you're starting to put together your renovation plan. Because if you have multiple units, maybe 100 or 200, those costs add up very, very, very quick, and you will not get the rent for those. So there are certain things that you have to do and you should do well, but there are other things that you don't need to do. The residents do not care if you have granite countertops. But they do care if you have Formica, so you have to find something in between that's not as expensive as granite and not as cheap looking as Formica. Those kinds of things are very, very, very important, but it all is a little balance between rent and the numbers. And then the last thing is obviously the ROI, or the return on investment. So what does that mean? So I'll give you a quick example. Back in the mid-2000s, when I started doing these value-add projects, and mind you, we did not have this going on. We did not have the ability to raise rents, to put a new carpet and all that kind of stuff. We were just buying properties as quickly as we could, but I found a little niche, and what it was I was looking for only properties with washer and dryer hookups. In other words, you guys have seen these properties, and so when we would, let's say, go to Dallas, Texas, we would meet with the broker, and we'd say, only show us or give us properties that have washer and dryer hookups in them, but no washers and dryers. So you guys know these properties. So usually those properties have laundry rooms at the property itself, and they go down and they're spending $1.50 per wash and per dry, or they're going to a local laundromat. And so that's a basic inconvenience for a renter, because they got to oftentimes sit down there, run up and down the stairs or across the place to go to the laundry room, or maybe across town. So those are inconveniences. And so we only looked for those. And this was a major strategy for us in the early 2000s, and this is how we made most of our money. So at the time, we said, what if we found those and bought washer and dryer sets? And so we cut a big deal with Whirlpool and GE, and we bought almost 1,000 sets of washers and dryers in the mid-2000s to about 2010. So obviously they were very happy, but the average price for us was about $650 for one set, okay? So imagine you're a renter, and you don't have a washer and dryer, and now we just put one in. And so that's what we did on all the properties that we bought, regardless if it was vacant or occupied. And so the ones that it was occupied, they were, oh my God, this new ownership, we love these guys. And of course, you can't charge them more rent because they're on a lease. But at the end of the lease, we said, listen, now that you've got a washer and dryer, your rent's gonna be $50 to $75 more a month. And so let's just use $50. So $50 times 12 is $600. So we've almost, in 1 year, paid back for that $650 washer and dryer set. So the return on this investment is about a 1 year return. In other words, we spent $650, we got it back in rent on the average. Okay, so obviously we put them in all the vacants immediately, and we re-rented all those units for $50 more. Now, we added massive value. So in other words, instead of them going down and having to use a laundromat, they were able to use their own in a brand new washer and dryer set, and we charged them $50, and eventually those got up to $75. So that's what we call a return on investment, or a 1 year payback. So in some cases, this could be a 2 year payback or a 3 year payback, but this is a very important thing, especially when you're up here trying to figure out how much money to put into a renovation project. You're not going to put $7,000, $8,000, $10,000 a unit into something where you're going to get $25 or $35 more in rent. That just doesn't make any sense. If you want to take a look at a fascinating article that just came out on rent control in New York, is the city of New York started not allowing the owners to get more money for renovations. So the owners stopped doing renovations. And so there's an article that I just read this week. The owner said, why would I spend $20,000, $30,000 on a unit that I own when the city's only telling me I can get $35 more per month? And that's because it's a rent control property or a rent control area. And so those are the kinds of things you got to look at. So that's a return on investment is low because they're only going to get $35. So in this particular case with the washers and dryers, $650 for a washer and dryer set, anywhere from $50 to $75 per month, more than pays for those washers and dryers in 1 year. So as you're continuing to do things at a property, whatever it might be, whether it's putting a dog park in, or putting in garages, or putting in carports, or putting in yards, or whatever you might be doing, just always equate it back to how much more can you get in rent and what's my return on investment, what's the cost versus what I get back annually. So again, guys, thanks for watching.